We've already formed a quorum for the meeting. Thank you for attending today's meeting. Item 1 on the agenda today. Well, you can invite them to come in. Good morning, Chief Secretary for Administration.
All
right, let's proceed to item 1 on the agenda. Update on the financial situation of and arrangements for the West Kowloon Cultural District project. We've got the latest papers. Those who would like to ask questions, please raise your hand. I'd like to see whether there are many members asking questions. 5 minutes each. Questions plus answers. We'll invite the CS to give an introduction first. Mr. Chairman, members, good morning. On the 3rd of July last year, I personally attended the meeting of the Joint Subcommittee explaining the WKCD project's financial situation and arrangements. I'm pleased that once again, in capacity of the board chairman of the WKCDA, I'm reporting again the progress of this major project of WKCD. I'd like to tell you that Mr. Michael Lynch, the chief executive, has family matters and are now in Australia and so cannot attend personally. We've submitted 2 papers today to allow members to understand the latest financial situation and arrangements for WKCD and the integrated basement. I'll first of all explain the financial situation and arrangements, and then in the second agenda item, I'll use a PowerPoint presentation to introduce to you our proposals for the integrated basement. In July last year, I explained to the public and the Joint Subcommittee the WKCD project. In formulating the drawings and plans, we spent more time than expected, and during the public engagement exercises, there are additional requirements, and construction costs have risen tremendously, such that we face tremendous financial situation. The one-off grant of $21.6 billion won't be able to complete all the facilities. That said, the administration and the WKCDA promised to develop WKCD into a world-class facility. We have to reassess this project, which spans over a decade, and its financial situation thus rather difficult. We have to provide facilities that are put to proper use. There are 3 aspects here. We'll strictly control the cost of each item, such that the core cultural facilities budget can be maintained. Secondly, we emphasize the content rather than appearance of the facilities. Number 3, the park and culture and art facilities should be completed as soon as possible for public use. For the first batch of facilities before their commissioning for public use, that is in 2017, with no intention to seek further funding from the LegCo. However, to alleviate the financial burden of the authority, the government is prepared to bear all the construction costs of the integrated basement. But there are joint facilities and government facilities to be provided. These are PIW, that is public infrastructure works and related works, like roads, drainage systems, fire stations, and so forth, so as to support the WKCD development. For the 45 hectares of the district, in future, residential properties, business premises, and hotels will have their proceeds go to the government. wherein when appropriate will apply for extra funding from the LegCo. 2 items have been approved as at today. Today, we submit a paper to seek a further funding of $300 million. I'll explain in detail later. In the past 10 months, the authority had adopted a whole series of measures to save construction costs for the Xiji Center with a value engineering exercise. For the small art gallery, there's a ceiling for expenditure with a very simple design that emphasizes functions. So a no-throw venue will be provided as soon as possible for public use. Apart from containing costs, we also try to have other savings and effect proceeds, like support services, including manpower costs. In the 2013-14 financial year, we got 247 staff members, but at the end of March 2014, including trainees and so forth, we have 186 only. For new resources, in February this year, we have the Shichu Theatre, Bamboo Theatre, which was let to local art groups for venue using so as to increase proceeds. Please refer to paras 25 to 26. We'll proceed to the construction program. In September 2013, Xiji Center was started, and for M+ and the small art gallery and the park will commence work this year. For the second batch, including the performance venue, the design work started in February this year. So construction costs are to rise. As for our present financial situation, I'd like to bring out a few points. Number 1, for the authority, it received a funding of $21.6 billion, which had got some return in investment. After deducting expenses at the end of financial year 2013-14, we now have $23.7 billion. Number 2, the LegCo, before approving our budget for the integrated basement and the budget targets for individual items, before the LegCo does so, will have sufficient funds to cope with the first and second batches of facilities. The first batch of facilities will be totally commissioned in 2017, including the park, the small art gallery, the free zone, the Xiji Center, and M+. The second batch covers what I mentioned, the performance theater, to be completed in 2020, and the contemporary art gallery, a medium-sized performance venue, and certain facilities to be used by the art troops. These facilities may be affected by the XRL Hong Kong section. In a moment, I'll explain the details to you. Apart from these 2 batches of facilities, there are retail, beverage, and other art and culture facilities. They will produce design and construction cost. As for retail, catering, and leisure facilities, there's been slippage. Part of the $21.6 billion will have to be used to cover the losses in the initial stage of the first batch of facilities. As for the third batch, the Grand Theatre, the concert hall, and other facilities will refer to the construction cost of the first 2 batches of facilities, the relevant stakeholders, and the local art and community sectors. Given this financial position, we propose the following. First, we'll explore other financing methods. For example, to invite the private sector to build temporary performance venues. Number 2, to the west side of the site, the Artist Square development area will be commissioned as soon as possible to bring in retail, catering, and leisure facilities that will bring us proceeds. Number 3, will open new resources. We'll have donation and sponsorship plans. And we've seen initial results. Oli 6, Mr. Oli 6, earlier gave us some collections that cost $1.3 billion. M+ announced this month a philanthropist gave us $1 billion for public art sculpture exhibition space on the mainland. That is 7.76 million Hong Kong dollars. And there's about $5 million of a collection fund, such that we can procure artworks in international auctions and sales. This is to promote a culture of supporting art and culture. We'll make good use of the existing resources and study various financing options to map out our operational and financial strategies so as to maintain sustainability in our development. We'll have the principle of openness and transparency.
I pledge that every year we'll report on the financial performance of West Kowloon, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, we'll enter a question session. Ma Feng Guo, Mo Mangjing, Lau Weiheng, Jie Weiqun, 5 minutes each. Well, first of all, I need to declare I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of West Kowloon Cultural District. I want to raise a question. The Chief Secretary is a senior official and also chairman of West Kowloon. So my first question, when West Kowloon operates, I had mentioned that we don't have sufficient funding, whether we could increase the plot ratio. Well, the source of funds are limited. It's now been adjusted. The government has covered the extra expenditure on the integrated basement, so we're going to be spending more and more. But if we're not going to increase the building structure, and yet the expenses are so high, then the original design, the whole integrated basement, well, of course, if we have sufficient money, then it's good, but we now have such a severe financial challenge. Has the government considered, is it possible to amend Norman Foster's design? We have such a low plot ratio. There's a lot of room for adjustment. Could we have a partial or completely abandon the Norman Foster basement design and retain environmental facilities? Could we thereby reduce our investment? Because I'm concerned if we commit to the basement, there might be more problems. The expenditure would balloon, especially if we're not doing it in one go. It will be dragging on. So if we don't complete the basement, it cannot play its function. So have you considered, let's convert the use, let's use an at-grade transport system and reduce the expenditure, and we can also use the system at an earlier date. We couldn't consider this in the West Kowloon Board of Directors, but this is actually something the government should consider. I just want to ask, has the government thought about this? Chief Secretary, the integrated basement, it's the city garden elements in the Foster design. The purpose is to allow embarking, disembarking, conducted underground, and the space could be used for other functions. In 2009 to 2011, in the 3-year period, there were 3 phases of public engagement. The public are in support, and because of this, we have chosen this design concept. Well, it's not a matter of like or dislike. It's also a matter of necessity. From the town planning perspective, we had pledged there were 23 hectares of public open space. So if we don't place certain facilities underground, we won't meet the town planning requirements. Currently, if you were to scrap the basement, then we'll have to start from zero. We'll have to do consultation all over again. We'll have to start from scratch. So for the Hong Kong public and even expectations, it would be a setback. So it's not a practical solution. So as you see, even for the Sichu Center and the museum, they also have a basement. So we need this basement function. So to answer Mr. Ma's question regarding the plot ratio, we're now in Section 16 amendment of the plot ratio. You cannot underestimate there's a lot of opposition. I've not called for an increase. I already said so. Well, but my perspective is that if you look at this, well, I think time's up. Where the government will be committed to more expenditure. Claudia Mo, a lot of large infrastructure projects are delayed, or the budget has ballooned out of control. But just now, the Chief Secretary mentioned that they have to come to LegCo for an extra 300 million funding. So is that going to be another white elephant? The explanation you're providing, there are a lot of terms that that cannot be understood. You're considering this option, you're proactively considering, it's all vague. And yet you're saying the facilities will be based on function over form. Well, after listening to all this vocabulary, we're not sure what you're talking about. All we know is the government says it will do its best. You say you're considering other financing options. You want to make up for a time difference. You're saying private performers will have temporary performances. Well, could you be a bit more specific? The West Kowloon Cultural District, what has been done? Is the government concerned that it'll be late, it'll be over budget? Another white elephant. Well, thank you, Chairman. Well, I need to clarify regarding the financial arrangements. In 2008, LegCo granted 21.6 billion for construction and operation. It was stated clearly that the whole West Kowloon District, for it to operate, there are a lot of PIW. That is the government infrastructure that works. It's not just cultural facilities. There are office space, there's residential space. So, Chief Secretary, I understand that. I have discussed this with the CEO, and I understand that the budget was just a basic budget, but up till now, there is a feeling that the government is treating LegCo as a ATM. It's coming for hundreds of millions. Otherwise, we'll have just a big construction site. Well, Ms. Mo said that we were asking for 300 million. That's not the case. It was a financial arrangement for infrastructure, and the government would bear this cost. It's not the 21.6 billion. It's not related to and LegCo also monitors our spending. On each occasion, we have to come to LegCo for funding applications. We're not trying to make up for any shortfall here. As we said last year, in the one-off funding application, the construction costs have doubled. So as I said just now, in the latest report, we have started some works, and our one-off funding is sufficient to complete the first batch and second batch. The third batch, as I said, as I mentioned previously, we'll have to review that. Ms. Emily Lau. We've waited for 20 years, so from the patent year up till now, and it's still a big construction site. We're all upset. I think the Chief Secretary will also talk about the express rail link and how it's affecting your project. Well, we'd like to have the facilities available for public use. I agree that it should be practical, but it doesn't mean that we need to neglect the facade. We're very happy to see beautiful designs, but does it mean it's going to be expensive? Not necessarily. You need to exercise control, but you do want to encourage innovation. We want to have a very smart and elegant facade. You want to control expenditure. Staff will reduce from 246 to 247 to 186. That's a big drop. So were you expanding the establishment recklessly? But then it's a big project, so you need to exercise some control. On the last occasion, I mentioned that the staff deployment, the board of directors, their term is about to expire. So are we going to replace them all? And the civil servants, he's also leaving. So it's not just him. Other people seconded to West Kowloon are also leaving. So staff are leaving en masse. We're very worried. You said that you're seeking funding for Phase 3. Well, I don't think you'll pay it in one go. Tens of billions. Well, it's okay if you want to seek sponsorship, but we don't want to have names plastered all over the place. Well, we don't want the establishment to balloon and expenses to be out of control. So please respond. Chairman, in my opening speech, I had wanted to tell legislators that starting from July last year, after updating you of the finances, in the last 10 months, we have been exercising strict control over expenditures. An example, and I gave you an example. Every year we have a business plan. In the business plan for 2013-14, the establishment was 247. But even though we approved it, we wouldn't necessarily allow it. It would depend on the progress. As of from 31st of March, including interns and including agency staff, we have 186 staff. So similarly, the chairman is concerned about consultant fees. We have controlled that. We have only spent about a third of the consultant fees. What about staff departures? Well, staff deployment is normal. Up till now, the West Kowloon Board of Directors, when it was established in 2008, they were all brand new members. And by the end of this year, well, when we consider the composition of the board, as Ms. Lau said, the government is very concerned that we'll have directors serving 6 years. So we'll have to consider seriously if there are too many board members leaving at the same time, what impact they will have on the project.
Mr. Chairman, some people told me that the CS has been very busy. She spent not much time on WKCD, so we're very worried. Whether or not I've spent enough time on the project, just look at my performance today. Well, CS, your performance today is not very good. Is it a fact that you did not spend much time on this project? Well, I'll allocate my time to various items. Mr. Chairman, WKCD is expected by the public highly. Now, $21.6 billion were given to this project. At that time, that is in 2008, we got a timetable. Of course, we're not adhering to the timetable now, and there are uncertainties. We'll have a third batch of facilities. Can we be informed why we cannot adhere to the original timetable? For this injection of $21.6 billion, given government consent, up to now, no more injection was effected for the WKCDA. Some infrastructure works, like the integrated basement, would be borne by the government. That's our concern. This is not a direct injection, but financially it will impact on WKCD. Apart from infrastructure and so forth, which the government can bear, are there other aspects that are worthy of our concern? Apparently, WKCD is facing a financial problem. Is there a problem now, or are you going to think about this in future only? And the CS mentioned the Town Planning Board. For this increased plot ratio, increase by 15%. Well, that's uncertain. We don't know by how much that will be increased. But then, for the actual construction, will the government underwrite the costs? CS, response please. For the WKCD timetable, apart from the third batch of facilities on which the financial position has to be reviewed, we have no timetable. But for the first and second batches, we do have a timetable. At the moment, the WKCD site is affected by the XRL. In a moment, you can look at the drawings, then it will be easier for you to understand. In a moment, I'll show you in the WKCD site, there is this Area 2A. On top of it, we'll have the second batch of the facilities in the main. And then underground, it will be the West Kowloon terminus of the XRL. If the terminus is delayed by 2 years, will also be delayed by 2 years. That means the handover of the site will take place 2 years later. I'll explain in a moment. As for the basement, whether it's extra injectment, I'll explain that in 2008, the consultative committee compiled a financial report. At that time, there's no such basement. $21.6 billion. Yes, many buildings of basements, but not a comprehensive one like this one. Not an integrated basement like this one with all the facilities and utilities, public transport, etc. I mentioned that we'll encourage donations and RDE. Apart from construction and design, we have to look at operations. Throughout the whole world, such facilities suffer a deficit. So part of the RDE facilities will bring in proceeds. In the next paper, you'll be able to see that for these facilities that can bring in recurrent proceeds, they'll be completed in advance and put in the piazza so as to cover the operational deficits. Secondly, whether or not the Town Planning Board will grant our Section 16 application for this minor relaxation. An increase of 15% in plot ratio will give us an additional 110,000 square meters of gross floor area. We'll share this with the government. The original plot ratio was 1.81, 760,000 square meters. So some will be government facilities, some belong to WKCD. We'd like to address aspirations from various sectors. Many would like to see a hostel or hotel on the site so as to reduce the accommodation costs of the performance troops coming in future. Now we're striving for an increase of the plot ratio to maximize the use of the site. Later, we'll assess how this extra floor space will impact on WKCD. For officers for the WKCDA headquarters or the hotel I refer to a certain extent, we would like to see a public-private partnership. Sari Lee, Chen Chi-chun, Ip Kok Him, Alan Leung, Chen Yun Han, and Frankie Yik are going up. I'll draw a line for the first round. Second round, Ms. Emily Lau has raised her hand. For the second round, I'll reduce the speaking time per member. According to the original time schedule, we should conclude this item by 9:25. Ms. Tareli, members of the public have been waiting for a long time, but there are a lot of hurdles now. In 2008, the cost was $21.6 billion. There'll be a slippage, particularly the XRL will be delayed, so it's unavoidable that WKCD will also be delayed. The CS mentioned a number of development directions in order to minimize the political risks, to strictly control costs, to have no-frill facilities, to open up new sources of proceeds, including the integrated basement. I'm very worried about these arrangements. Still, there are a lot of uncertainties. Still, the political risk is still very high. If we don't handle them properly, this will become another hot potato for the administration. To have savings and more proceeds, we of course have to encourage donations. Given this huge project, at this moment, how will the WKCD cope with the deficit? It's just like what Ma Fong Kwok mentioned. For the Phase 3 facilities, they will be delayed, but have you ever considered giving them up? Secondly, will you come to LegCo for extra funding? Thirdly, to increase plot ratio, that's very difficult. I think politically that's not practical. Another option is to issue debts or bonds. Well, we shouldn't be confined to these 4 options. What is your assessment at the moment, and what are your considerations? Yes? Thank you, Chairman. In recent times, whenever WKCD was discussed, as some members said, we would like to have organic growth. That is, we should not put in the pipeline all facilities in one go. Now we have to look at the Great Theatre and the other venues. Even for the LCSD is not stopping constructing such facilities. There's a major facility in the area to meet public aspirations. We have to ensure that we have sufficient funds for phases 1 and 2. It's pragmatic to wait and see for phase 3. Given these developments, and if local art and culture are to flourish, we of course have to come back to LegCo to explain and seek further funding. As for adjustments to the program, as I said, the art piazza will be readjusted to cope with our financial position so that we'll have more recurrent revenue. As Mr. Riley said, it's not practical to ask for an increased plot ratio. But for issuance of bonds, we have to seek consent from the Financial Secretary, but we have to repay our debts. I can't see how we can have the ability to repay the debts. We're not like the URA, which can develop property developments. So in the WKCDA, we have not seriously considered or discussed this. Next, Mr. Chan Chi-chun. Thank you, Chairman. The public feeling for WKCD is overspending. By how much? Nobody knows. Councillors have been discussing whether or not we can foot the whole bill with $50 billion. Not even the CS dares to answer this. He dares not touch upon this. They say we have 10 pots but just 5 lids. No, I think it's even worse. Because you're cutting latter facilities like RDE facilities. You say you'll be pragmatic in strictly controlling the cost for each and every item. Well, even if you don't have overspending, you should be doing this. It's not overspending that wake you up. And then for manpower, you originally planned for 247. Now you say 186 would be enough. So a cut of 25%. That means originally you're asking for too much. But if there's insufficient manpower, your staff members will be overburdened. Why is it that now you can cope with 186? Maybe you say for the initial stage, small or a smaller number of staff will be able to cope. Now, another feeling that I get from this paper is that you are very nervously seeking for new funds. Paras 26 and 28 of the paper say that you seek donation, say for the naming of facilities. But this is controversial within the government. What is the position of the government in terms of naming? Is it eventually will see something like Mr. Lee, blah, blah, WKCD? Para 6 mentions a number of fundraising projects. Maybe in future we'll have something similar like those for the Tunghua Group of Hospitals. Maybe we can have something like a Safe WKCD mini fundraising campaign, and with naming of facilities, you may be selling off your facilities in order to get hundreds of millions of dollars. Yes, today I'm here not to discuss overspending. Here I'm to explain to you our work in the past year. $300 million is not overspending. That is actually the infrastructure committed by the government. Internally, the management is reviewing our fundraising strategy. We must abide by rules and regulations. As for naming rights, Mr. Chan can rest assured that we'll not sell the naming right for the whole WKCD project. Not even individual facilities would sell off their naming rights, like the Shichi Center. But there are other facilities like Wing. Well, if you visited the UK or the USA museums, you have seen that. Maybe a gallery, a tea room, and the like can be donated by a certain person if the amount of donation is huge enough. Then we may give that person a naming right. Again, as I said, there are rules and regulations to be observed, and if there are proposals, we'll discuss with the proponents. Well, you can cooperate with the Jockey Club to work out the final bill, and then you can charge an administrative fee. But usually, the guesses will not be materialized. Mr. Cohen, thank you, Chairman. In the LegCo, we've been discussing the WKCD for a long, long time. European, we have conducted study tours to European and American jurisdictions. The public has high expectations of WKCD. In the past, Hong Kong was known as a cultural desert. We would like to see a change given the commissioning of WKCD. We've been waiting for a long time, and we've heard strong voices.
So, the West Kowloon site has been sitting vacant for a long time. We have to give people a result. So we heard the talk about being over budget. Well, in LegCo, in the FC or PWSC, every item is over budget. But I think that's not the focus. Well, we should be worried about it in the future, but does that mean after approving 21.6 billion, we won't be putting up any extra? Well, I think conditions now are different from before. The construction costs have changed, and it's also been dragging on for so long. We also note that the government, I will accept the application for funding. We had talked about the infrastructure related to West Kowloon. The government would invest or be responsible for roads and infrastructure. So the basement facilities, I think we need to be fair. Ma Fong Kok mentioned that we can scrap the design. Well, if we were to do that, I don't know how long it would take before we see the end result. So we shouldn't tamper with the design. We should be more practical, and we need to control the infrastructure spending. But my question is, how? Well, the impression that the West Kowloon board is giving people will be very worried about how it handles its finances. So in this process, during the infrastructure construction, we need a comprehensive set of measures to handle the expenditure. Thank you, Chairman. As everybody knows, I wear two hats. I am Chief Secretary of the government, and I'm also West Kowloon Board of Directors Chairman. So when government projects seek extra funding, if the budget was drawn in 2008, I can say that by 2014 it would be insufficient because construction costs have doubled in the last few years. But the government told West Kowloon should stick to 21.6 billion and we will be responsible for the basement. So up to now, we want West Kowloon to use the 21.6 billion and its investment return to the first two phases of facilities. We're not rigidly requiring them to build every facility. We have to look at the people's response, the creative industry's response. But there's also a view that when we conclude phase 1 and 2, we will conduct a review and we will not rule out funding application to complete the remaining facilities if the public and society have that request. The Chief Secretary should be aware that the Civic Party was against the one-off funding. We thought it was unreasonable. The LegCo panel had an expert report saying that the government underestimated the funds needed. Well, but that's water under the bridge, and I had said before that we don't want to fall short of expectations. We are concerned about Hong Kong's status and whether we can have a shining star in the arts and creative industries. It's not just a couple of operas for public enjoyment. The Chief Secretary is aware of developed countries and advanced cities where they are developing cultural industry. So Hong Kong is depending on West Kowloon. I was surprised when you said that you will not rule out seeking funding, and you also said you won't rule out not building this third phase. So what is the third phase? It includes large performance venue, opera, a music center, and a grand opera. Well, if we don't have these, then what will West Kowloon look like? Well, I don't want my forecast to come true that you wanted to draw a tiger but end up with a hound. I hope you don't come to that decision. But I understand what you're trying to do. If you allow the public to enjoy phase 1, phase 2 facilities, you might have more sympathy, and you could direct that sympathy towards a fund application at LegCo. And well, the high-speed rail link is going to be late. It might be late 2 years, at least. These 2 years will lead to increase in construction costs. Costs will go up. And then you're telling West Kowloon to stick to 21.6 billion budget. So they should build phase 1, phase 2. Well, isn't that unfair? So who will be responsible for the extra costs? Chief Secretary. The last question, I can respond. Ms. Emily Lau had said, should the Chief Secretary serve as West Kowloon Board of Director Chairman, because you said I don't have enough time. Oh, I've thought about it. Because in electoral reform, I had to expend a lot of effort. But a responsible government, when handling such a large project, it's not only the public's expectations. We already built some international recognition. So having senior officials monitor, it's necessary. That's why I can say here, I'm not only the West Kowloon Board of Director Chairman, I'm also the Chief Secretary of Government. So our financial and other support is very clear. Now regarding Phase 3, as our document says, we are still responsible, but it depends on the development. So it's not a matter of doing or not doing it. The land is already there. We're not thinking of selling the land, but we need to consider the timing. Otherwise, if our arts development can't catch up, it will be a waste. So that's our stance. Thank you, Chairman. Chief Secretary, you're working terribly hard. When Longkakit asked you, we really depend on the staff you're working with. I think they're not up to the task. If you look at Home Affairs Bureau, I have criticized them previously. It's like a pumping station. You're siphoning off our funds. And now you're adding projects. We have M Plus and the Shichu Center, and then the Express Rail link is holding things up. Given the conditions, I think you need to tell us what you are going to forsake. We need to be down to earth and practical. So we have the Shichu and M Plus, and we're left with this. We need a large performance center. Who will build it? We need to make forecasts. And now you have this basement that apparently it's not feasible. So maybe we should just untie the Gordian knot, just slash it. I will follow up on the basement in the second part. You mentioned 10 billion, and now it's 20 billion and even more. So that's an abyss. I support you, Chief Secretary. You are a very meticulous person, but your staff are just not up to task. So I suggest that I'm not saying Mr. Akali is incompetent, but you should reform the government. you should try to coordinate all the efforts. Well, I need to reiterate that in West Kowloon, whether it's the board of directors, the management, or home affairs and other bureaus, because we have 3 bureau secretaries working there. We're working very hard. So there's nothing of what Ms. Chan Yunhan mentioned just now. From land use perspective, we have not taken away 1 meter of West Kowloon. In fact, we want to utilize it to the fullest extent. So we even want to increase the plot ratio. We would like to add some facilities that were called for previously. And building West Kowloon in 3 phases is very practical. In 2008, building all 10-odd structures in one go was a bit too ambitious. And we had a lot of infrastructure built in the last few years. Inflation and labor costs are escalating. Could it be spread out? I think that is also very practical. So West Kowloon is developing along these lines. On the west, we're not affected by the express rail link.
Therefore, earlier it was a wise decision to focus on the western side of the site. But this time I have to reiterate that the phasing approach is not because of the XRL delay. We have our own methodology. But as a result of the XRL slippage, this phasing approach is more pragmatic. Mr. Frankie Yik? Well, basically, it's a fact that there's overspending for the WKCD project. The issue is how we're going to face that. However, even with these difficulties, we shouldn't casually change our plans. But I agree with the government that we should adopt a pragmatic approach and adopt a gradual handling approach. Well, a pragmatic approach was mentioned. We should focus on the contents instead of the appearance. That was what I read from the paper. Ms. Emily Lau also mentioned that. I have to declare that I'm a member of the board of the Hong Kong Repertoire Theatre. I don't want to see a useless facility. So you have to save costs, but basic and essential facilities must be provided. In paper 1591-04, it's mentioned that earlier Mr. Tony Tse mentioned the air quality and temperature of the integrated basement. I mentioned this at one of our meetings in the past. For residential developments, commercial developments, or comprehensive development projects, there have always been complaints about air quality and temperature. But in the past, we were talking about small size public transport interchanges. Now we're talking about a large public transport interchange. So I'm concerned about air quality and temperature. In the past, I said that if the temperature is to be so high as to scare people off, it would not be proper. We should encourage people to use green transport. But that's not pragmatic. You see, we've been developing electric vehicles for so many years. Still, we only have a few hundred on our roads now. So we have to wait till electric transport is more common. So I hope the Bureau will pay more, or the authority will pay more attention to air quality and temperature. I'll defer to Dr. Chan. But I'd like to say that will not sacrifice the actual functions of the facilities. Well, by pragmatic or no-frill, we mean will not emphasize too much on the appearance, but still we're going to produce a world-class facility. Well, Mr. Chairman, the detailed design has not started yet, but of course air quality is an important factor of consideration. As for temperature, we'll definitely monitor that. And the roads inside the site, we have to study the EIA report as well. So for those aspects, you can rest assured that we'll monitor the situation very stringently. Dr. Helena Wong, Dr. Chang Lai Wan, and a few more members, including myself, would like to speak. Any more? If not, I'll draw a line there because we have overrun. All right, 3 minutes per member, including questions and answers. Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Chairman. The WKCD may become a white elephant. In 2008, you were given $21.6 billion. At that time, that amount of money was not meant to cover all expenses, right? That is only for M+ and design and construction of facilities. So, were the buildings in batches 1, 2, and 3 covered back then? Yes. Yes. At that time, it was meant that the $21.6 billion should cover all those facilities. But for government facilities like drainage systems will be covered by the government. All right. Now, if you read the paper, you see that $21.6 billion won't be enough. The reality is that there's overspending, but by how much? It becomes a bottomless pit. We don't know how much more money we have to inject into this project before it is enough. You now adopt a phased approach. Apparently, you have enough money for batches 1 and 2, but for batch 3, the green and blue patches here, you may not have enough money. And given what the CS said just now, we're even more afraid because our standard, so to speak, in terms of art and culture may not warrant the original facilities. That means the original plan may not be implemented. You don't even know whether you have sufficient money for the original plan. It's now a definite reality that we'll not have enough money. But the point now is we don't see the end of the tunnel yet. Is it that in future you try to change the concept? The big WKCD will become a small WKCD with 2 blocks, one in the east and one in the west, plus the park. And in terms of art and culture, do we need so many galleries, theaters, and so forth? You still not know. So we don't know whether the project will come true, and we don't know the ultimate plan. A brief response, please. I believe the project will be realized, but at the same time, we have to adopt a pragmatic approach. Mr. Cully reminded me that in 2009, 2011, in the public engagement exercises, we heard the view that after some time we should conduct a review rather than build all the facilities in one go. So that's in line with our present position and attitude. And as Mr. Alan Leung said, the MPV has never been included in the $21.6 billion. We've always been talking about financing because that may be the only facility with a commercial value. So for batches 1, 2, and 3, if the market is interested in any particular facility, we can consider possibilities. But of course, for the time being, we don't see any market interest in this project yet. Dr. Chang Lai Wan, thank you, Chairman. CS, I'm more concerned about the future management and the future financial position of the WKCD. Today, you've given us a comprehensive report. Can you please tell me, in future, for management alone, how can the authority balance its books? At the moment, for certain public bodies, the pay adjustments for the senior officers are not that transparent. Very often, the senior officers enjoy a higher pay, while the junior officers are paid at a very low level. Well, just recently, we had this case of a CEO being paid $13 million. That's rather appalling. And just now the CS said that consultancy fees have gone down. Now you've provided us with two tables here. If you look at the budget in 2011, you'll see that the consultancy fee has not gone down. You got $40.7 million. And then in 2012-13, you got $10 million more. For 2011-12, if you compare that with 2012-13, you see that for staff emoluments, if you plus all the figures in the two appendices, you see $90 million, a rise of 36% over the preceding year. I'd like to know the pay for the top 3 senior officers. Yes? Well, these year-on-year comparisons are not too relevant to the WKCD, which is new and young. The WKCDA was set up in 2008. So in terms of hardware and software, it is a must that we'll see more cost incurred by manpower requirements. Well, there are these expenses for both works and manpower. Consultancy fees as well as construction costs will rise. Dr. Chang Lai Wan asked about the senior officers. With 9 of them, our degree of transparency is quite high. You can get the details from our annual reports. Maybe I can provide you with the information after the meeting. Next, Ms. Emily Lau. Mr. Chairman, I didn't ask the CS not to serve as the board chairman of the WKCDA. Maybe she wants to leave the post. If she wants to do so, say so. Well, it's useful to have the CS in this post. Some stakeholders complained to me that she didn't have sufficient time for the project. So maybe you should reshuffle your time schedule. Mr. Cully has not spoken yet. He's only whispering to the CS. Somebody told me that investments were not very effective, and Mr. Cully has always been known as a person with a lot of ideas. Well, are you going to ask the exchange fund to do something for you? Is the investment return ideal? Please tell us what you have in your mind. We can have beautiful facilities, but may not be costly. Mr. Cully? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As for investment return, I think in actual fact, during the initial year, we spent 6 to 12 months to talk to investment experts in the financial sector. That is, how to invest this $21.6 billion. After deducting the consultancy fee, the investment return for WKCD was not that ideal. And then we asked ourselves whether we should talk to the exchange fund to see whether they can help the WKCD. Now, I don't want to waste your time. In simple terms, about $10 billion were channeled to the Hong Kong MA. At the moment, the average rate of return, that is from 2009-10 to now, on the average is 3%. For the first 2 years is 5 to 6%. They don't charge us a consultancy fee, but the investment is capital preservation investment. The time schedule is highly flexible. So in our CFO, we hired somebody to assist us in investment. But by investment, I mean deposit in Hong Kong dollars, renminbi, and US dollars. In the past few years, the investment return has been quite good. Well, if you deposit your savings with banks, if on the average you have a return of 1%, is already very ideal. But for us, the average has been 2 to 3%, so it's quite satisfactory.
We now have 38 billion, and only 3%. But after 2008, after the financial, it's 3.8 billion, not 38 billion. Mr. Jie Wai-chun. So the same project has the same function, and if it's handled by someone else, the economic efficiency would be different. So I agree that the staff are very important. West Kowloon is about arts and culture, and it needs to be sustainable. We need to fund that. So I hope that the Chief Secretary consider the composition. You cannot just rely on culture. There's no income. So the direction is good. It's not possible to have just one single product. So I hope you shouldn't focus too much on one element. You need to have the commercial talent. Otherwise, it would be very hard to operate. I don't want to see a continuous funding by the government. That's my opinion. Any response? Thank you, Mr. Jie. We are proceeding exactly along these lines. We are now recruiting a COO. That post was there initially, and Mr. Michael Lynch thought that we might not need that person immediately, but as development progresses, when we have F&B, catering, entertainment facilities, we need a person with more business sense. So given 100,000 square meters, how will you deploy the area? So we need to strengthen our expertise in this area. Chan Yunhan. I'd like to tell the Chief Secretary, you have M Plus and the Xichu Center in the middle. It depends on how the express rail link will be built. So this part will be scrapped. That will include phase 3. So what will that be used for? And we have a large park here. The large performance area, do you have funds for it? Is it going to be just grass? So I want to ask. You have phase 3, and you have a large park, including a large performance area. Do you have money for that? How will you build it? Chairman, Ms. Chan has entered the next agenda item. And by 2015, we'll be able to provide the open space for public use. The public, they like promenade areas. Regarding the large performance area, we need private sponsorship. We need a commercial value. So you have no money now. We never had money. So even with the 21.6 billion, there was no money for this. This is the only item out of all that we thought that could make money and be self-sustaining. So in our footnote, we have mentioned that we need other financing models. Well, I thought the 21.6 billion was for 15 facilities. Well, last year you said no, you had to build in phases. Okay, but now, well, the large performance area, why do we have to postpone it? Do you understand what I'm saying? When we talked about the 21.6 billion, there were 15 venues, and now it's being postponed, and now you're saying that even this large performance area doesn't have funding. Is that what you mean? And our initial 15 performance venues, well, my colleagues remind me that there might be partial funding, but it wouldn't be 100% funding for this. So you didn't set aside 100% funding. But no, the document says that you need to read carefully. Ms. Chan, you're interested in, you have the documents? I've downloaded them, and that's why I asked you this question. Alan Lau? The Express Rail Link is delayed 2 years, so the West Kowloon Authority, when they're now in phase 2 of building the Lyric Theater, and costs they'll go up. If we were to transfer the cost to West Kowloon, it's not fair, but I'm aware that the Chief Secretary did not answer that question. Well, it's not, we're not here to apportion blame. I hope we don't apportion blame in the future. But why do I have to ask this question is, if you look at the Contemporary Performance Center and the Lyric Theater, they are in Zone 2A, 2C. The Chairman, you are aware that it's now being monopolized by the Express Rail Link as a construction site. So if these facilities are completed earlier, then it would help West Kowloon finances. My understanding is that there's retail F&B facilities here, so it would help with the accounting. So I want to ask the authority. The high-speed rail link is monopolizing the site. So when do you think they can relinquish some of the site back to West Kowloon to build the second batch of facilities? And is the Express Rail Link cooperating? Are they always holding things up? Now I'm openly urging the high-speed rail link that your delay is delaying West Kowloon by 2 years. If you don't want to, you should cooperate with West Kowloon. If you can release the site If you can open the access roads, you should do so. So I want to ask the authority, at the construction site, are you facing difficulties? Is the high-speed rail link uncooperative? Thank you, Mr. Lau. I'm very happy to update you on the impact of express rail link, but I need to do that in the next agenda item with the aid of a PowerPoint. Well, Mr. Leung is correct. As West Kowloon Board of Director Chairman, I am urging MTR to release the land. They're just using the land to store equipment. They cannot affect our development. I'll give you a detailed response later. I have 3 opinions. Chief Secretary is the appropriate person to lead the West Kowloon project. We don't have too many government officials. In fact, we have too little. In the motion debate last year, there is a problem with management. There's insufficient transparency. The documents are only available a few hours before the meeting, and they are collected after the meeting. Whether it's procurement, engineering, recruitment, there are a lot of problems. Why do I say your consultant fees are too high? Why do you need to recruit such top-end staff as consultants? You need to control that. That's the first point. Since you are reshuffling the board, you need to use that opportunity to improve management. The second issue is about work phases. The Phase 3 facilities are core facilities, as the Vice Chairman mentioned just now. These are essential facilities, but you're leaving it in Phase 3, and you are forcing the government into funding it. You're treating LegCo as a ATM, where you can siphon money at will. So the 21 billion is spent on small facilities. Well, that's not appropriate. The third opinion, I agree that you should have practical facilities. You want 300 million for a tent, for a temporary performance venue, and then you withdrew that application. So this comes back to the management problem. You need to improve your management. Thank you, Chairman. I think any organization has room for improvement, and I'm very willing to hear your views. Regarding the phased work, we are constrained by the availability of land. We're not deliberately placing certain projects in Phase 3 in order to get easier funding. I need to clarify. Chairman, you mentioned the 300 million temporary venue. That was an internal discussion. I don't know how you would get that information. The Board of Directors disagreed. Given tight finances, the Board of Directors did not agree on investing on temporary facilities. But it doesn't mean we cannot invite private institutes to build very durable temporary performance venues. So we'll now enter the second agenda item, the implementation of the integrated basement. let's start. The second paper is implementation of West Kowloon District integrated basement. This is a city garden design. These are the zone 2A, 2B, and so on. Here, of course, we are looking. The park will not be affected, so we will not discuss that. Here you can see the blue area, the government sites for that is the land that will be sold for hotel, office space, residential. The yellow mustard sites are the West Kowloon facilities. We had a vertical integration design, so in the blue areas we'll have non-core facilities, we'll have F&B, recreation, retail. So I'll now talk about the individual areas and how they're affected by the high-speed rail link. This is the reason why we have to build the basement, because we want to have vehicle-free at-grade area.
Difficulty in implementing the integrated basement in one go. First of all, the site is very big, so in terms of scale and complexity, there will be difficulties. Besides, site availability may also be a difficulty, because if we are to wait till the whole site is available, we may have to wait for a few years. Thirdly, there are technical difficulties. Our engineering departments do not know what superstructure buildings there will be, what their configuration will be. So it will not be good to build the basement first. We may also be wasting money. About a year ago, we started to think about this integrated basement. So we discovered that we'll face a lot of difficulties, including the design uncertainty of topside developments. So at that time, the XRL issue was not there. So there are several rationales for phased implementation of the integrated basement. First of all, to tally the phased implementation plan of integrated basement with the site availability schedule. Some schedules are already submitted to us, but not all. So we make sure that the superstructure and the basement proceed together. Secondly, the cost would be huge if we are to build the basement in one go. If Ms. Chen Yunhan wants to know the smaller sums and breakdowns, we can provide the information. Now, the blue patches are sites through which the government can have some proceeds. And then hotels, offices, residential units should be put on the market as soon as possible. Now, I'll introduce every zone. Zone 1A, work started last year. The foundation works will be completed very soon, and now we're tendering for the main works. This is not directly related to the integrated basement. It has its own basement, and the two basements are separated. I thought the Xixi Center would not be affected by the XRL, but now it seems that it may also be affected because some of the land is being occupied by the XRL work site. So we would like to recover the land required by the Xixi Center as soon as possible. And then Zone 3A and 3B. 3A is the museum, and then 3B, lyric theater. Our plan is that Zone 3A and 3B will be developed comprehensively. For the first batch, museum, lyric theater, second batch, well, whether you call it a mini WKCD or comprehensive WKCD, we're now going to combine the two. Now, there are few blue patches which can be developed in a more advanced manner. So, you have museums, listen to music and concerts, dances. You also have offices, shopping malls, or even residential units. We believe that's a more proper way to go about it, so as to give the area more vibrancy. When compared with other zones, this is not so much affected by the XRL because it is a distance away from the XRL site. But then for 3B, well, for 3A, the cluster of museums won't be affected by XRL, but for 3B, nearer the waterfront, there's a barging point for unloading. We would like to know whether XRL can give us the whole site for developing 3B by moving the barging point slightly. We're going to talk to the MTRCL. Foundation works will start for the museums by the end of this year. For the sake of consistency, some facilities in 3B should be done at the same time. Otherwise, we won't have the effect of integration. So, we're targeting underground works for 3A and 3B. We can explain further if necessary. Well, Zone 2A is more directly affected by XRL. As Mr. Alan Liang said, most land of Zone 2A is on top of the West Kowloon terminus of XRL. So if that terminus is not completed yet, the second batch of facilities in Zone 2A cannot start, even though WKCDA has the funds for Zone 2A. So the Center for Contemporary Performance, the Medium Theatre, and so forth will be directly affected. But will the slippage be as much as 2 years? We're now examining whether any land can be handed over to us earlier. So Zone 2A is more troublesome. We have the money. Well, if we don't have the money, if they give us the land later, it doesn't matter. But now we have the money, but they cannot give us the land. So Zone 2A will be affected more. For Zone 2B, if you remember, it includes all land included are blue patches for residential units, hotels, and offices. As I said, some are non-core cultural facilities and RDE facilities. Instead of asking the government for a huge sum of money for excavating the land for underground facilities, it may not be proper because some superstructure may have underground facilities. So if we can take back Zone 2B as early as possible, then by way of land sale, developers can enter Zone 2B and develop it as early as possible because these are precious land for hotels, offices, and retail businesses. We'll reimburse the developers. You're familiar with this mode of operation. When we apply for funding for PTIs or even elderly homes, the construction works are not done by us. In the land sale terms, we stipulate that the developer will be responsible for construction. But of course, there are stringent requirements, and when the construction works are completed, there will be a reimbursement to the developer. That is to expedite land supply at least by 3 years. Now, the government is facing a lack of land, so this approach will benefit us. Finally, Zone 2C. This is in Phase 3, that is Batch 3 facilities. They're on Zone 2C. For the third batch of cultural facilities, its time schedule and funding details are not yet confirmed. So we don't think we should create a basement first, because the basement may be left vacant for almost a decade. That may not be in the best public interest. Whether or not Zone 2Z will be affected by the XRL, well, the impact, if any, won't be huge. But as I said, we ourselves don't yet have a timetable for this, so we don't mind the XRL occupying it for longer. So we would like XRL to focus on Zone 2C and at least vacate Zone 2B and 2A also, if possible, for our joint development with the developers. Now, just now we mentioned the Artist Square development area. That is the red patch with the dots. Now, please refer to this drawing. It's an area. It's not a fragmented area. There are museums, office, residential blocks, lyric theater, conservation storage facility, and other arts and cultural facilities. And we're talking about 200,000 square meters. That is a quarter, about 24% of the total floor area for WKCD. If we can increase the GFA by 15%, we'll be able to get this 200,000 square meters. And that will be sufficient public space. If you have noted our museum design, have you got this latest booklet M+? You'll see the museum design. A great deal of public space will be provided. We'll emphasize that the whole Artist Square will have huge public space for public use. Well, again, we use colors to indicate the 3 batches of facilities. The lighter colors indicate private lots. For this document, the most important funding request has 3 aspects. First of all, a PWSC paper for Public Works Program. The $300 million covers in Zone 3A the preparation works for 3A. This is PIW. And then for Zone 3B, the design fee for the basement there. Then we can develop the area as soon as possible. Then another ESG paper for a chief engineer post in CEDD, a supernumerary post for about 5 years to assist or represent the government to carry out this integrated basement project. Well, the time schedule is tight. As I said, the foundation works of M+ will start in August this year, so we very much hope that before the LegCo summer recess, the 2 projects totaling $300 million could be approved. Dr. Chong Lai-wan, Claudia Mo, Chen Yun-han, Emily Lau, Helena Wong, Mr. Alan Leung, and myself have queued up. Well, Mr. Chairman, nobody could hear you. Would you please be more precise and concise in your terminology? Well, what did you say, Mr. Chairman? I hope you can be more concise and precise in your terminology. Chong Lai-wan, Claudia Mo, Chen Yun-han, Alan Leung, Sit Ho, Tony Jie, and myself. I'll draw a line there, because in a moment we'll have the council meeting. And Mr. Chen Chi-chun as well. No more. 4 minutes per member, including questions and answers. Before you ask questions, let me remind you again that you have to take note of 83A of the Rules of Procedure in terms of declaration of interest. At our meetings for direct pecuniary and indirect pecuniary interest, members should not speak on the motion unless the members concerned disclose the nature of the interests. If you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in any of the discussion items, you should declare the nature of the interest before you speak or before the discussion. Dr. Chiang Lai-wan, yes, you said that for the whole integrated basement is 200,000 square meters. No. Only the GFA for the Artist Square development area. For the integrated basement, what will be the total area? And then recently, we're talking about this increased plot ratio of 15%. Does that cover the integrated basement? And what about building height? We did tell the WKCDA and other parties that they should not increase the building height. They should have horizontal developments. Otherwise, members of the public will be affected. Now, the XRL will have a slippage of 2 years. Now, one project is to affect another. So they lose, you also lose. But of course, they have to swallow their own loss. But what about your loss? Your loss may lead to your coming back to us for extra funding. Understand that the contractors have been affected.
So now they're affecting us for 2 years. Will you seek compensation from MTR? And Chief Secretary, I hope that since you're building the basement, could you concentrate the plot ratio in the basement and not have too many considerations at grade level? Well, our basement is 17 hectares. Under the basement are the road, embarking, disembarking, and parking space. So that is not included in the GFA. The whole plan had never intended to include retail, hotel, residential in the basement. When I was chairman, we had looked at whether we could dig deeper, because in Kowloon West, Simsajoi, there are technical difficulties and the cost would be very high. So there are no plans to dig deeper. Ms. Jung is concerned about the 15% increase. It's not approved by the Town Planning Board, and when we conduct a consultation, there were opposition, especially regarding the height. So our consultant is striving to not exceed 100 meters. That was the original constraint. We want to satisfy the requirement. I have not looked at loss. As far as I'm aware, they have not returned it to West Kowloon, so I don't know how we could ask MTR to compensate. I hope the Chief Secretary should be aggressive in seeking compensation. Well, this plot ratio belongs to the government. This 17 hectares, is it also government land? The basement did not increase the plot ratio. The superstructure increased 15%, 110,000 GFA. 110,000. It's not all of it belongs to the government. It has divided. So the formula is when the plot ratio was 1.8 and the area was 720 720,000. So, and with an extra 15%, it will be divided amongst West Kowloon and the government. The government will sell whatever extra is made available. The West Kowloon will divide the land amongst the office space for West Kowloon. It would also provide some space for performance organizations, and we'll also have some space for accommodation when we have a large performance, large bands visiting. Claudia Mo, I think Ms. Zhang Lai was talking about the basement, not hell. Her pronunciation wasn't that clear. You're not responsible for, well, there's no if in history. Isn't it redundant to talk about the past? So for the record, can you tell us? We have a problem with the XRL. Now, if XRL, if it didn't cut through West Kowloon and extend all the way to West Kowloon, we wouldn't have these complex issues. Now, you're not talking about compensation. Well, West Kowloon and XRL, these are all government projects. Whoever pays whom is still coming out of the public coffers. It's redundant. So please answer my question. One, with hindsight, is there any regret? And second question, we have so many constraints, 100 meters deep. It's because of that land. One headline, Ming Pao headline, said that in 1997, the French engineering company said that it's all granite. To dig underground is a big engineering project. The government knew well ahead of time. If you knew that in advance that this granite there, now you have to build the XRL and West Kowloon. Were you aware of that? And third question is, the Chief Secretary will not admit that this project is now in bits and pieces. Even the diagram you're showing us, there's no problem in the West, but in 2A, we'll have to wait for the XRL. They say 2 years, I hope so. And then 2B and 2C are actually your phase 3 works. It's so 2B and 2C are phase 3 projects, and it might not be built after all. So the basement will be blocked, but it should be connected. But then in the middle it won't be connected. Or are you just going to build a little tunnel? The whole design is wrong. And the fourth question is the 23 billion to build a basement, and the middle might not be connected. And that has that included phase 3 engineering works, or have you already ruled out that you might not build that? So where did the 23 billion come from? Because the one-off funding was only 21 billion. Of course, I understand that construction costs have gone up. Well, first, pros and cons. Whether the discussion was about XRL or West Kowloon, people felt that accessibility wasn't that important. The closer it is to transport hubs, the more attractive it would be. Some people even said that you could take the XRL from Shanghai, spend a night, and then return. So I cannot say that this arrangement is unsuitable, but that's the first question. The second question, as I said, in considering the phased development of the basement, lasted more than 6 months. So it's not related to the XRL delay. It wasn't because of that, and therefore we conducted that discussion in the Board of Directors of West Kowloon. Third, it's a holistic West Kowloon Cultural District, except it's built in phases. It has to be, as far as I know, the LegCo would like to build phase 2 for your assistants and other colleagues. So for large projects, building in phases is par for the course. You cannot say, therefore, it's bits and pieces. Ms. Claudia Mo's understanding is not correct. 2B doesn't contain core cultural facilities. It's in 2C, phase 3 is in 2C. And we have, regarding traffic, you don't need to worry. In our land sales, we will require them to build these roads. So the roads will be there. So 2C will be delayed. It will not affect the accessibility of the basement. And the CEDD will conduct a detailed study to they will stipulate the design parameters for the developers, and the 23 billion does not include phase 3 facilities. The 23 billion is for 2 parts. It is for the basement. If we from 2A to 3B basement, roughly, because we don't have the design, and 4 billion is the PIW. Ms. Tan Yun Han. I'm concerned about our money. Well, last year you said the basement would be 10 billion, and now it's 23 billion. And you said it's just a rough estimate. Well, that's fair. But at 20 billion in today's estimate, so I want to ask the Chief Secretary, can you stay on budget given the price inflation? We have it in 2008 that there were 15 facilities, so 23 billion. Is it according to material costs and construction costs? Well, if you say it's going to cost 30 billion, well, I want to make sure if I approve the funding, I need to know how much extra I'll have to fork out in the future. Now you're saying that you are seeking funding for 3A and 3B. That's the money that you'll be using now, and then you have a diagram. It's a total sum of 10 billion. 10 billion comes under the 23 billion. So you're saying that can you give us a clear accounting of the figures? I spent a lot of time and effort on reading the document. I just want to clarify, is that you're now saying it's a rough estimate. What is the 10 billion used for? We see there's also 300 million being used. Well, I want you to tell us clearly rather than giving us different figures over the years. Please respond. Last year it was 10 billion, and now we have a different figure. Well, I went through all our old documents. I went through what I've said in press interviews. The government was willing to foot the bill for the integrated basement, this basement is very expensive. It will exceed 10 billion. We had never given a breakdown. Is that correct, Ms. Mo? Over 10 billion. It won't be less than, well, but from 10 billion to 23 billion. So you cannot assume that 10 billion was for the basement. Today's 23 billion, it's not apple with apple comparison. 4 billion are roadworks, drains, and so on. The 19 billion, it's a rough estimate. I cannot say that this will not change, especially regarding 2C. Because when will we build 2C? It's not confirmed. And we don't know what the building requirements are. But in the coming few years, we will seek funding, whether through this panel, the subcommittee, or the FC. Well, because of time constraints, we'll have to extend by 15 minutes. We have Emily Lau, Sid Ho, Han Ji-chun, and myself. 4 minutes. We cannot exceed that.
Mr. Chairman, the MTRCL put the blame on the black rain storm warning. And now you're using XRL as an excuse. Over $10 billion for the integrated basement, and then the original $21.6 billion plus further costs. In the end, it may be as high as $40-odd billion. So much money. This is Hong Kong people's money. And you're now talking about a mini WKCD. CS, how are you going to explain that to the public? Were you wrong in your approach? Hong Kong is very rich, but you refuse to put certain facilities and services here. At the end of the bill, at the end of the day, will the bill be as high as $50-odd billion? We're in support of a cultural district, but you have to be in control. I hope that the administration and the WKCD can think thoroughly through this. For this XRL terminus, we don't know when they'll be completed, and for co-location, even now we don't have an answer. Many people say that without co-location, they'd better not do it at all. And now all these are bundled together. Today, the message we got makes us feel uneasy. CS, how are you going to tell the public that, oh, really, the ultimate cost will be as high as $50-odd billion? How can the LegCo and the public accept that? CS? Thank you, Chairman. In actual fact, we did seriously consider the project before proposing this phased approach for development. We'd also like to focus on the western side of the site. We shouldn't just look at the cultural facilities and complete them one by one. Well, the WKCD will be affected if we don't have XRL. So we hope that we can adopt a pragmatic approach for WKCD. Besides, we'd like to complete some of the facilities as soon as possible for public use. For the park, it's 2015. For the Shichi Center, the smaller galleries, the museums, they'll be completed in phase. I would like the public to feel that their living quality will be enhanced, given that Hong Kong is a cosmopolitan city. Then we'll proceed to other phases. I've said this before. I said this last year. This year, I'm saying the same. We think that before 2017, we won't come to LegCo again for extra funding beyond the block grant of $21.6 billion. Well, over $20 billion for a basement. You really have to think about this. The MTR have to cope your effort. I heard that they're complaining even when we asked them for the use of ferry piers. And you mentioned the barging point. You would have to ask the MRL to help. The public is annoyed and they are ever raising their fares. The MTR is also out of control. Please go back and look into them. Well, look at the $50 to $60 billion as the ultimate cost. I think this is very, very costly for the public. Please go back and think about this very clearly. Well, we never had this budget of $50 to $60 billion. Still, we're hoping to finish the facilities with the $21.6 billion, plus the sum that we're asking for this time, $300 million. Dr. Helena Wong, the XRL slippage has adversely affected the WKCD. The XRL is taking up 14 hectares of our land here for WKCD. Now, this paper was submitted to the LegCo. Back then, it's clearly marked which site had to be handed back to the WKCD. Starting from January 2010 to the end of 2014, these 14 hectares of site should have been handed back to the WKCD. In the subcommittee on railways, I asked about this. The senior officers of MTR were all there. Senior officials were also there. I asked how many hectares of land had been handed back to the WKCD. They scratched their heads, apparently that they don't know about this. And now the CS is saying that they don't mind a delay in handing over the sites to us. Well, that's a problem. And the XRL doesn't mind the slippage. There's a timetable, but they're not adhering to it. I think even by 2016, they won't be able to hand back all the land to WKCD. CS, you failed as a gatekeeper. The MTR also adopts a wishy-washy approach. Is it that nobody should be held responsible? XRL slippage has led to slippage in the WKCD project. In the subcommittee for railways, I asked who should foot the bill, MTRCL, the administration, or the WKCDA. Is it that nobody is responsible? Hong Kong people are to bear the consequences of mismanagement totally. There are timetables that are not observed. The 3-member task force is to check the errors and mistakes. Is it that nobody should be held liable? Well, I hope Dr. Helena Wong would not misunderstand me. I'm not saying that I don't mind the late handover of land to us. For Zone 2A, covering the third batch of facilities, we have to confirm the timetable and the financing details. But for 2A, 2B, or even 3B, in my response to Mr. Alan Leung's remarks, I said that we would like to adopt this approach such that WKCD can get back the land concerned as soon as possible for our construction works. Mr. Chairman, this paper was from the government. Back then, they're talking about zones 2B and 2C. From January 2010, they should be handing back land to us. Now we're in 2014. Now this site should have been handed back to WKCD in 2012. But now it's 2016. A slippage of 4 years. For 2B and 2C, there's a slippage of 4 years. Who should be held responsible? Is it that you fabricated the contents of this paper back then? As the housekeeper of WKCD, should you not ask the MTR to hand back the land to you? There's a slippage of 4 years. Well, the time schedule is very tight. We still have a few members to speak. We have to finish latest by 10:55. Mr. Alan Leong? We'll give you the answer after the meeting. Written reply, please. Mr. Alan Leong? Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the CS. You said you would, in the capacity of the chairman of the WKCTA, strive with the MTRCL to make sure the XRL hands back the land to WKCD so that facilities can be completed as soon as possible, such that our people won't just enjoy the facilities in WKCD, but embrace the facilities. How are you going to discuss with the XRL? What's your timetable? And let me say this in public to the XRL. It's not the WKCDA begging them. Members of the public are very dissatisfied with this delay in the WKCD project. So, XRL, please be cooperative as far as possible. Otherwise, in future, if any deficits are incurred, the public will be very angry. So, what's in your mind, CS? What's your plan? Now, the WKCD project is to be completed in phase. That is, you adopt a fragmented approach. In future, how can you ensure that the two basements can be connected professionally? CS? For the first question, I said just now that the CEDD will conduct a feasibility study later. As for Mr. Alan Leung's questions, they'll be taken up by the feasibility study. Maybe my colleague can supplement. Well, in the interim, a lot have happened, leading to the XRL slippage. Therefore, this has impacted on the handing back of land to us. We've already contacted the management of the MTR and obtained the information that we told members just now. As for information and the timetable for the outstanding land to be handed back to us, I'm also dissatisfied. Maybe I personally or Professor Anthony Jung would ask the MTR for a concrete timetable on land handover. Mr. Chairman, concerning the basement of WKCD, we've got a schematic layout. This schematic layout, if we adopt a phased approach in terms of design and implementation, then this schematic layout will be a foundation, and all other aspects will try to match. In principle, there shouldn't be any problem. For individual zones like zones 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, will they be laid out in the form of a line as shown in the PowerPoint slides? Will carry out a detailed feasibility study to look at the connectivity of each and every zones in the basement. We just now the CS said that the $300 million are for 3A and 3B. What about the other basements and their connections? They are not covered by the $300 million. Well, let me supplement. This funding proposal focus on 3A and 3B. But at the end of the year, there will be another application for funding to include the design of the basement of 2A and 2B. In the second application for funding, this aspect will be included. Mr. To, we formally started consultation for WKCD in 2005. Well, a decade has elapsed. 25 years have elapsed. In South Korea, they've completed a similar facility and is now adopting a leading role in art and culture in Asia. Yes, I understand the CS is trying to gather public opinion, but when it comes to works, we have to be quick. Unfortunately, we're hindered by the XRL. Even though I support plentiful funding for art and culture, as we've started, well, same for WKCD and XRL, we've started, the land is there for you. Are we going to give you extra funding? If we are to do so, it seems that we're creating a bottomless pit. The CS said that she would be very prudent with phase 3. I'm pleased to hear that. We talked about organic growth. As the CS said, if we have caught up, then we look at the requirement for manpower. Then we'll develop the hardware. But organic growth is not for the government to use as an excuse to cut down on art and culture expenses, as well as manpower expenses. Now you get this fragmented approach for us. The original design of Norman Foster is that WKCD should be smoke-free. All the utilities will be put underground.
Just now, Alan Liang asked about accessibility. Can we connect from the Sichu Center to the large performance facility? If that cannot be achieved, then we need to make some amendments. Some traffic arrangements should be made at grade, and you need to be honest with us. And in the past, why were we not able to catch up with the cultural aspect? Because only 5% went to the software. Hardware made up 95%. So if the ratio is out of proportion, so we won't be able to catch up even in 30 years. So shouldn't you have other considerations? Shouldn't you add more resources to the software? West Kowloon is an important cultural item, but Hong Kong's cultural development cannot be borne solely by West Kowloon. So in recent years, under the Home Affairs Bureau, we have increased resources, for example, in training and other software facilities, cultural software facilities. Now, since I became chairman of West Kowloon Board of Directors, I agree that within West Kowloon's terms of reference and abilities, they should do more work on training, and it's not just all about money. It's about program content. Now, regarding the third batch, we don't want to affect the land use. It's just a matter of timing. So Ms. Ho can rest assured the land resources are not affected. What about the transport network in the mid-term? Mr. Arkali? Thank you, Chairman. If you look at the basement drawings, the management have provided a schematic. From Canton Road, there's an entrance, and in Austin Road, there's also an entrance. At M+, there's another entrance. So from Canton Road, it has to connect to the west, and we need detailed technical feasibility studies. But we're now building 1A, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B in phases. When it's all built, it will be connected. It should not take 30 years. 40-hectare site, a 4 million square feet site. I don't think it can be built in one go, so it's inevitable that it would be built in phases. We're just concerned that it shouldn't drag on. But we need to be practical now. We need to start. Otherwise, it's just empty talk. So, building in phases is appropriate. But now we need to consider accessibility. But we do not need to worry because the West Kowloon Authority has so much talent. They should be able to deal with this obvious issue. Regarding the integrated basement, this leads to many problems, including air quality, ventilation, whether it's environmental friendly. But in order to build the facilities, this seems to be an inevitable outcome. The integrated basement also has to be built in phases. Nobody would be willing to do it. So we have the links. These are very complex and we need to handle it carefully. So I'm considered that it's being built in phases and it will be linked up. So the management, will it be under West Kowloon Authority? The integrated basement management fees will be more expensive than regular basements. Will the government subsidize that? Or the West Kowloon will, since they have 21.6 billion, will they have to foot the bill? The management of the whole basement and relevant facilities will be managed by the authority. So regarding the fees, if it's more expensive, will the government subsidize? Chief Secretary? Management fee subsidies. There are more expenses. And the 21.6 billion, these fees were included, but they will also generate income. Given today's land prices and rent, the GFA for F&B, retail, and so on, should generate higher fees given today's escalation in costs. The more we ask, the more problems we discover, and the more worried we'll become. You said that this basement is very expensive. It would cost more than 10 billion. So you said that it's going to cost more than 10 billion. It could be 20, 30 billion. So when you made that comment, did you have a figure in mind? Did you, and now the government is footing the bill, but you said it would be split between the West Kowloon Authority. The 19 billion is for the basement and 4 billion is for the infrastructure, and 2C is not including. But if you look at Annex D, the 19 billion includes everything. 1A, 2B, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B. So could you explain? Did I hear wrong? Well, first of all, as I replied last year, we did not have a concrete figure. Otherwise, we would have said so in the document. Well, since I had to make a response, all the information I had was it would be expensive. It wasn't just $1 billion or $2 billion. I did not have the figure of 19 billion. The 4 billion is for the infrastructure. The basement is 19 billion, and this includes 2C. Just now, Ms. Collier-Mo asked the Phase 3 facilities, that is the superstructure. No, it's not included. It doesn't include the superstructure. When we review the third batch of facilities, then we will consider that. The rationale, since West Kowloon 40 hectare 4 million square feet, some of that would be sold by the government, but the basement would be shared, so we needed to have an equitable share of costs. But by last year, when we realized that costs escalated, the 21.6 billion, if a few hundred million were to be spent on basement, it would affect the cultural facility. So the senior officials, then now I'm speaking as Chief Secretary, we had discussed with the CE and said, since we're responsible for the government facilities, so we would be responsible for the basement and allow West Kowloon to build the facilities. One reason was to relieve their financial burden, such that the 10-odd cultural facilities could be completed within the 21.6 billion budget. So the 2C basement is covered, but the superstructure is a question mark. So is the 2C basement also a question mark? We have not set aside money. 2C, when we review, when we will build the superstructure, we will build the basement. The technical study says we don't know what you're building on top, so building a basement would be a waste, especially for operas. They might have a strange exterior, so there's no point in building a basement now. Well, everything has been asked before we conclude. So, do you allow continuous vetting by PWSC and FC? Well, when I heard the 20 billion basement, I'd like to meet with the administration. I also want them to think through it again. It's not 40, 50 billion, but when you add them together, it's 40, 50 billion. If you are confident, you can go ahead with the FC and PWSC, but the Democratic Party has reservations. Well, the basement is 23 billion. I want the administration to consider, could you allow some of the traffic to be at grade level? So there's no point in holding up the 300 million, but you need an adjustment. So we don't object you to submitting it to PWSC and FC. The meeting adjourned.